This is Section 12 of Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain, Section 12, Territorial Enterprise, December 1863. Territorial Enterprise, December 1st through 3rd, 1863. Excerpt from original article concerning an affair in Virginia City. A tide of eloquence. Afterwards, Mr. Mark Twain, being enthusiastically called upon, arose, and without previous preparation, burst forth in a tide of eloquence so grand, so luminous, so beautiful, and so resplendent with the gorgeous fires of genius, that the audience were spellbound by the magic of his words, and gazed in silent wonder in each other's faces, as men who felt that they were listening to one gifted with inspiration. Applause. The proceedings did not end here, but at this point we deemed it best to stop reporting and go to dissipating, as the dread solitude of our position as a sober, rational Christian, in the midst of the driveling and besotted multitude around us, had begun to shroud our spirits with a solemn sadness tinged with fear. At 10 o'clock the curtain fell. Territorial Enterprise, December, 1863. Letter from Mark Twain. Carson City, December 5th, 1863. Editors Enterprise. The church in Carson prospereth. A fine edifice will soon be completed here, wherein the gospel may be comfortably preached, and listened to in comfort likewise. A complimentary benefit to this enterprise was given at the theatre last night by Hon. James Stark and Mrs. Cutler, the profits of which amounted to upward of $200. Mrs. Cutler recited several poems, and sang a few choice songs, with such grace and excellence as won for her the compliment of repeated and enthusiastic encores. Mr. Stark's readings were well selected and admirably delivered. His recital of the speech of Sergeant Buzfuz in the great breach of promise case of Bardell versus Pickwick was a very miracle of declamation. If all men could read it like him, that speech would live after Cicero's very creditable efforts had been forgotten. Yet heretofore I had looked upon that as the tamest of Mr. Dickens's performances. And just here I am constrained, in behalf of the community, to do justice to Charlie Parker's liberality and good citizenship. He prepared his theatre for this church benefit, put a stove in the green room, and had the house duly cleaned and lighted, all at his own expense. It was a good action, and gracefully and unostentatiously performed. The convention will probably complete its labors about Wednesday. The members are growing restive and impatient under this long exile from their private business, and are anxious to finish their work and get back home. 3 of the Esmeralda delegation, Messrs. Stark, Connor, and Bechtel, being imperatively called away by the necessity of attending to their private affairs, have been granted indefinite leave of absence. These gentlemen have been constantly at their posts, and unremitting in the discharge of their duties, and well deserved this kindness at the hands of the convention. And between you and me, if there were no ladies in Carson, my estimable old fossil, Colonel Youngs, would ask permission to go home also. Now, why will a man, when he gets to be 1,000 years old, go on hanging around the women, and taking chances on fire and brimstone, instead of joining the church and endeavoring, with humble spirit and contrite heart, to ring in at the 11th hour, like the thief on the cross? Why will he? Questions of privilege. Mr. Stearns rose to a question of privilege again to-day, and requested that the reporters would publish his speeches verbatim or not at all. The fact is, they ought to be reported verbatim. But then we work 18 hours a day, and still have not time to give more than the merest skeletons of the speeches made in the convention. Johnson and Stewart and Leroux and Bryan and others complain not, however, although we condense their remarks fearfully. Even Judge Brosnan's stately eloquence, adorned with beautiful imagery and embellished with classic quotations, hath been reported by us thus tersely: Mr. Brosnan opposed the motion. only that, and nothing more. But we had taste enough not to mar a noble speech with the deadly engines of reduction and the third person. Now, in condensing the following speech the other day, we were necessarily obliged to leave out some of its most salient points, and I acknowledge that my friend Stearns had ample cause for being annoyed at its mutilation. I hope he will find the present report all right, though, albeit the chances are infernally against that result. Have got his style verbatim, whether I have the substance or not. Mr. Stearns' speech. The question being on the amendment offered in Committee of the Whole to Mr. Stewart's proposed substitute for Section 1 of the article entitled Taxation, as reported from the Standing Committee. Mr. Stearns said, "Mr. President, I am opposed. I am hostile. I am uncompromisingly against this proposition to tax the mines. I will go further, sir. I will openly assert, sir, that I am not in favor of this proposition. It is wrong, entirely wrong, sir, as the gentleman from Washoe has already said. I fully agree with the gentleman who has just taken his seat that it is unjust and unrighteous. I do think, Mr. President, that, as has been suggested by the gentleman from Ormsby, we owe it to our constituents to defeat this pernicious measure. Incorporate it into your Constitution, sir, and, as was eloquently and beautifully set forth in the speech of the gentleman from Storey, the gaunt forms of want and poverty and starvation and despair will shortly walk in the high places of this once happy and beautiful land. Add it to your fundamental law, sir, and, as was stated yesterday by the gentleman from Lander, God will cease to smile upon your labors. In the language of my colleague, I entreat you, sir, and gentlemen, inflict not this mighty iniquity upon generations yet unborn. Heed the prayers of the people, and be merciful. Ah, sir, the quality of mercy is not strained, so to speak, as has been aptly suggested heretofore, but droppeth like the gentle dew from heaven, as it were. The gentleman from Douglas has said this law would be unconstitutional, and I cordially agree with him. Therefore, let its course to the ramparts be hurried. Let the flames that shook the battle's wreck shine round it o'er the dead. Let it go hence to that undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, as hath been remarked by the gentleman from Washoe, Mr. Champ. And in thus guarding and protecting the poor miner, let us endeavor to do unto others as we would that others should do unto us, as was very justly and properly observed by Jesus Christ upon a former occasion. After which the Convention, not knowing of any good reason why they should not tax the miners, they went to work and taxed them. Now, that is verbatim, as nearly as I could come at it. I took it from my own mysterious shorthand notes, which are mighty shaky, I am willing to admit. But then I guarded against inaccuracy by consulting the several authorities quoted in the speech, and from them I have the assurance that my report of Mr. Stearns' comprehensive declamation is eminently correct. I cannot bet on it, though, nevertheless, I cannot possibly bet on it. I think I have hit upon the right plan now. It is better to report a member verbatim occasionally, and keep him pacified, than have him rising to these uncomfortable questions of privilege every now and then. I hope to be able to report Bill Stewart verbatim in the course of a day or two, if he will hold on a spell. Mark Twain. Territorial Enterprise, December 1863. Letter from Mark Twain. Carson City, December 12, 1863. The Logan Hotel. Such is my destination. Thither I go to recuperate. I take with me a broken spirit, blighted hopes, and a busted constitution. Also some gin. I shall return again, after many days, restored to vigorous health, restored to original purity, free from sin, and prepared to accept any lucrative office the people can be induced to force upon me. If elected, I shall donate my salary to charitable institutions. I will finish building this chronic brick church here, and lease a high-priced parson to run it. Also an exorbitant choir. Everything connected with the church shall be conducted in the bulliest manner. The Logan Hotel is situated on the banks of Lake Bigler, or Lake Tahoe, which signifieth grasshopper in the Digger tongue. I am not going with any of the numerous pleasure parties which go daily to the lake and infest the Logan Hotel. I shall travel like Baxter's hog, in a gang, by myself. I am weary of the gay world, and I pine for an hour of solitude. The hotel is new, handsomely furnished, and commodious. It stands within 50 feet of the water's edge, and commands a view of all the grand scenery thereabout. Its table is furnished with the best the market affords, and behold they eat trout there every day. 15 miles over the new King's Canyon road is all the journey it is necessary to take, after which the worn pilgrim may rest in peace in the bosom of Logan and Stewart. That is as good a thing as I want, as long as I am not married. No more mines. A year from now there will not be a mine left in this territory. This is an appalling statement, but it is a true one. I guessed it from remarks made by that disreputable old cottonhead, Bill Stewart, who as good as promised me 10 feet in the Justice, and then backed down again when the stock went up to $80 a foot. That was a villainous way to treat me, who have gone on juries for him, and held my grip through all the monstrous fabrications he chose to present in his eloquent sophistry, and then brought in a verdict for him when it seemed morally certain that Providence would interfere and stop the nefarious business. I said, the last time, that I would never serve on one of Bill Stewart's juries again until they put a lightning rod on the courthouse. I said it, and my word is good. I am not going to take any more chances like that. But what I commenced to tell about was that last night, after the convention adjourned, and the political meeting was called together, Bill Stewart went to work with his characteristic indecent haste, just a parallel case with that Justice affair, to construe the Constitution, construe and determine the species of the new-laid egg from which is to be hatched our future power and greatness, while the tender thing was warm yet. Bill Stewart is always construing something, eternally distorting facts and principles. He would climb out of his coffin and construe the burial service. He is a long-legged, bull-headed, whopper-jawed, constructionary monomaniac. Give him a chance to construe the sacred law, and there wouldn't be a damned soul in perdition in a month. I have my own opinion of Bill Stewart, and if it would not appear as if I were a little put out about that Justice, that was an almighty mean thing, I would as soon express it as not. He construed the Constitution last night, as I remarked before. He gave the public to understand that the clause providing for the taxation of the mines meant nothing in particular, that he wanted the privilege of construing that section to suit himself, that a mere hole in the ground was not a mine, and it wasn't property. He slung that in because he has a costly well on his premises in Virginia, and that it would be a difficult matter to determine in our courts what does really constitute a mine. Do you see his drift? Well, I do. He will prove to the satisfaction of the courts that there are only 2 definite kinds of mine, that one of these is an excavation from which metallic ores or other mineral substances are dug, which is the dictionary phrase. Then of course the miners will know enough to stop digging and go to blasting. Bill Stewart will then show, easily enough, that these fellows' claims are not mines according to the dictionary, and consequently they cannot be taxed. He will show that the only other species of mine is a pronominal adjective, and proceed to prove that there is nothing in the Constitution that will permit the State to tax English grammar. He will demonstrate that a mere hole in the ground is not a mine, and is not liable to taxation. The end will be that a year from now we shall all own in these holes in the ground, but no man will acknowledge that he owns in a mine. And about that time custom and policy and construction combined will have taught us to speak of the staunch old bulwark of the State as the great Gould and Curry hole in the ground. Bill Stewart will put them up to it. In one short year, sir, from this date, I feel within me that Bill Stewart will have succeeded in construing the last vestige of a mine out of this country. State Printer. This subject worried the convention some. In the first place, the Standing Committee reported an article providing for the election of a state printer, whose compensation was to be fixed by law, etc. The members, without even showing the committee the courtesy of discussing the matter, snubbed them very pointedly by pitching the bill overboard without offering the semblance of an apology for their conduct. They substituted an article providing for printing state work by contract. That was debated to death and duly buried with its stillborn predecessor. Then they tried a superintendent of public printing. That plan appeared to suit them. They adopted it, and looked upon the work of their hands and pronounced it good. There the matter rested until last night, when Governor Johnson got up and asked unanimous consent to substitute the original state printer article for the superintendent. He pointed out to the convention that the office of superintendent would be turned into a mere sinecure, and its incumbent would accomplish no good to the state, and behold, without a word of objection the change was made. Verily it is vastly better to yield to wisdom at last than not at all. School Fund. Speaking of state printer reminds me that we made a mistake in the report published this morning. We said the school moneys were to be invested only in United States bonds, whereas the truth is, it was decided that they might be invested in either United States or state bonds. Hank Monk. A superb gold watch worth $500 or $600 was presented to Hank Monk here night before last. The donors were John S. Henning, Joe Clark, H. H. Raymond, Alexander O'Neill, William Thompson, Jr., John O. Earl, W. M. Lent, and 3 others. The ceremonies were conducted at Frank Ludlow's Daguerrean Rooms. Judge Turner made the presentation speech, and Judge Hardy replied on behalf of the defendant. Champagne flowed freely. The watch is gorgeously embellished with coaches and horses, and with charms and seals in keeping with the same, and bears for a motto Hank's famous remark to Horace Greeley, "Keep your seat, Horace, I'll get you there on time." Old Pa Utah. Lovejoy has issued the first number of his paper at Washoe City, and the above is its name. It is as pretty as a sweetheart, and as readable as a love letter, and, in my experience, these similes express a good deal. But why should Lovejoy spell it Pa Utah? That isn't right. It should be Pi-Ute or Pi-Ute. I speak by authority, because I have carefully noted the little speeches of self-gratulation of our noble red brother, and he always delivers himself in this wise: Pi-Ute boy heapy work, Washoe heap lazy. But if you question his nationality, he remarks with oppressive dignity, "Me no damn Washoe, me Pi-Ute." Wherefore my researches have satisfied me that one of these, or both, is right. Lovejoy ought to know this, even better than me. He came here before May, 1860, and is, consequently, a blooded Pi-Ute, while I am only an ignorant half-breed. Carson City. Call your Constitutioners home. They do nothing but sing the praises of Carson City, and Carson society, and Carson climate. Height, and Brosnan, and Youngs, and Stearns, and half the balance of them, are more than half inclined to stay here. It is absurd. Pipe to quarters. Final report. The Third House of the Constitutional Convention met in solemn grandeur at 11 o'clock last night. Tomorrow, or next day, I shall compile a verbatim report of its proceedings for the forthcoming volume of Official Reports of the Convention, and if you think you can afford to pay enough for it, I will allow you to publish it in advance of that volume. Mark Twain, President, Constitutional Convention, Third House. Territorial Enterprise, December, 1863. The Third House was an informal group of pranksters who often met and burlesqued the legislative process. Nevada State Constitutional Convention, Third House, Carson City, December 13, 1863. Reported in phonographic shorthand by Mark Twain. The Third House met in the hall of the Convention at 11 p.m. Friday, immediately after the final adjournment of the First House. On motion of Mr. Nightingale, the rules were suspended and the usual prayer dispensed with, on the ground that it was never listened to by the members of the first House, which was composed chiefly of the same gentlemen which constitute the third, and was consequently merely ornamental and entirely unnecessary. Mr. Mark Twain was elected President of the Convention, and Messrs. Small and Hickok appointed to conduct him to the chair, which they did amid a dense and respectful silence on the part of the House, Mr. Small stepping grandly over the desks, and Mr. Hickok walking under them. The President addressed the House as follows, taking his remarks down in shorthand as he proceeded. Gentlemen, this is the proudest moment of my life. I shall always think so. I think so still. I shall ponder over it with unspeakable emotion down to the latest syllable of recorded time. It shall be my earnest endeavor to give entire satisfaction in the high and bully position to which you have elevated me. Applause. The President appointed Mr. Small, Secretary, Mr. Gibson, Official Reporter, and Mr. Pete Hopkins, Chief Page, and Uncle Billy Patterson, First Assistant Page. These officers came forward and took the following oath. We do solemnly affirm that we have never seen a duel, never been connected with a duel, never heard of a duel, never sent or received a challenge, never fought a duel, and don't want to. Furthermore, we will support, protect, and defend this Constitution which we are about to frame until we can't rest, and will take our pay in scrip. Mr. Youngs. Mr. President, that is, the President. Mr. Youngs, if you have got anything to say, say it, and don't stand there and shake your head and gasp, as you have been in the habit of doing in the former convention. Mr. Youngs. Well, sir, I was only going to say that I liked your inaugural, and I perfectly agree with the sentiments you appeared to express in it, but I didn't rightly understand what— The President. You have been sitting there for 30 days, like a bump on a log, and you never rightly understand anything. Take your seat, sir, you are out of order. You rose for information? Well, you'll not get it. Sit down. You will appeal from the decision of the Chair? Take your seat, sir. The Chair will entertain no appeals from its decisions. And I would suggest to you, sir, that you will not be permitted here to growl in your seat, and make malicious side remarks in an undertone for 15 minutes after you have been called to order, as you have habitually done in the other House. The President. The subject before the House is as follows. The Secretary will read. Secretary. R. T. Arty. Article. The President. What are you trying to do, sir? Secretary. Well, I am only a helpless orphan, and I can't read writing. The Chair appointed Mr. Hickok to assist Mr. Small and discharged Mr. Gibson, the official reporter, because he did not know how to write. Mr. Youngs, singing, For the lady I love will soon be a bride, with a diadem on her brow. President. Order, you snuffling old granny. Mr. Youngs. I am in order, sir. The President. You are not, sir. Sit down. Mr. Youngs. I won't, sir. I appeal to— The President. Take your seat. Mr. Youngs. But I insist that Jefferson's manual— The President. Damn Jefferson's manual! The Chair will transact its own business in its own way, sir. Mr. Chapin. Mr. President, I do hope the amendment will not pass. I do beg of gentlemen, I do beseech of gentlemen, that they will examine this matter carefully, and earnestly, and seriously, and with a sincere desire to do the people all the good, and all the justice, and all the benefit it is in their power to do. I do hope, Mr. President— The President. Now there you go. What are you trying to get through your head? There's nothing before the House. The question being on Section 4, Article 1, free exercise of religious liberty. Mr. Stewart said, Mr. President, I insist upon it, that if you tax the mines, you impose a burden upon the people which will be heavier than they can bear. And when you tax the poor miner's shafts, and drifts, and bedrock tunnels, you are not taxing his property, you are not taxing his substance, you are not taxing his wealth, no, but you are taxing what may become property some day or may not, You are taxing the shadow from which the substance may eventually issue, or may not. You are taxing the visions of Al-Nashar, which may turn to minted gold, or merely prove the forerunners of poverty and misfortune. In a word, sir, you are taxing his hopes, taxing the aspirations of his soul, taxing the yearnings of his heart of hearts. Ah, sir, I do insist upon it that if you tax the mines, you will impose a burden upon the people which will be heavier than they can bear. And when you tax the poor miners' shafts, and drifts, and bedrock tunnels— the President. Take your seat, Bill Stewart. I am not going to sit here and listen to that same old song over and over again. I have been reporting and re-reporting that infernal speech for the last 30 days, and want you to understand that you can't play it off on this convention any more. When I want it, I will repeat it myself. I know it by heart, anyhow. You and your bedrock tunnels and blighted miners' blasted hopes have gotten to be a sort of nightmare to me, and I won't put up with it any longer. I don't wish to be too hard on your speech, but if you can't add something fresh to it, or say it backwards, or sing it to a new tune, you have simply got to simmer down for a while. Mr. Johnson. Mr. President, I wish it distinctly understood that I am not a candidate for the Senate, or any other office, and have no intention of becoming one. And I wish to call the attention of the Convention to the fact, sir, that outside influences have been brought to bear here, that— the President. Governor Johnson, there is no necessity of your putting in your shovel here until you are called upon to make a statement. And if you allude to the engrossing clerk as an outside influence, I must inform you, sir, that his battery has been silenced with Territorial scrip at 40 cents on the dollar. Mr. Stearns. Mr. President, I cordially agree with the gentleman from Storey County that if we tax the mines we shall impose a burden upon the people that will be heavier than they can bear. I agree with him, sir, that in taxing the poor miner's shafts and drifts and bedrock tunnels, we would not be taxing his property or his wealth or his substance, but only that which may become such at some future day, an Al-Nasharian vision, which might turn to coin or might only result in disaster and disappointment to the defendant. In a word, sir, I coincide with him in the opinion that it would be equivalent to taxing the hopes of the poor miner, his aspirations, the dear yearnings of his— the President. Yearnings of his grandmother! I'll slam this mallet at the next man that attempts to impose that tiresome old speech on this body. Set down. You have been pretty regular about rehashing other people's platitudes heretofore, Mr. Stearns, but you have got to be a little original in the third house. Your sacrilegious lips will be marring the speeches of the chair next. Mr. Ralston. Mr. President, I have but a word to say, and I do not wish to occupy the attention of the House any longer than I can help. Although I could, perhaps, throw more light upon the matter of our eastern boundary than those who have not visited that interesting but comparatively unknown section of our budding Commonwealth, it is growing late, and I do not feel as if I had a right to tax the patience— the President. Tax! Take your seat, sir, take your seat. I will not be bully-ragged to death with this threadbare subject of taxation. You are out of order anyhow. How do you suppose anybody can listen in any comfort to your speech when you are fumbling with your coat all the time you are talking, and trying to button it with your left hand when you know you can't do it? I have never seen you succeed yet, until just as you got the last word out. And then the moment you sit down, you always unbutton it again. You may speak hereafter, Mr. Ralston, but I want you to understand that you have got to button your coat before you get up. I do not mean to be kept in hot water all the time by your little oratorical eccentricities, Mr. Larrowe. Mr. President, there are 9 mills in Lander County already. Let me see, there is Dobson's 5 stamp, Thompson's 8 stamp, Johnson's 3 stamp. Well, I cannot give the names of all of them, but there are 9, sir, 9 splendid steam-power quartz mills, disturbing with their ceaseless thunder the dead silence of centuries. 9 noble quartz mills, sir, cheering with the music of their batteries the desponding hearts of pilgrims from every land. 9 miraculous quartz mills, sir, from whose steam pipes and chimneys ascends a grateful incense to the God of labor and progress. 9 sceptered and anointed quartz mills, sir, whose mission it is to establish the power and the greatness and the glory of Nevada, and place her high along the President. Now will you just take your seat and hold your clatter until somebody asks you for your confounded Reese River quartz mill statistics? What has Reese River got to do with religious freedom? And what have quartz mills got to do with it? And what have you to do with it yourself? You are out of order, sir. Plant yourself. And moreover, when you get up here to make a speech, I don't want you to yell at me as if you thought I were in San Francisco. I'm not hard of hearing. I don't see why President North didn't tone you down long ago. Mr. Larrowe. I think I am in order, Mr. President. It was a rule in the other convention that no member could speak when there was no question before the House, but after the question had been announced by the chair, members could then go on and speak on any subject they pleased. Or rather, that was the custom, sir, the ordinary custom. The President. Yes, sir. I know it has been the custom for 30 days and 30 nights in the other convention, but I will let gentlemen know that they can't ring in the 3-stamp Reese River quartz mills on the third house when I am considering the question of religious liberty, the same being dear to every American heart. Plant yourself, sir, plant yourself. I don't want any more yowling out of you now. Mr. Small. The Secretary would beg leave to state, for the information of the President. There now, that's enough of that. You learned that from Gillespie. I won't have any of that kind of nonsense here. When you have got anything to say, talk it right out. And see that you use the personal pronoun I also, and drop that presumptuous third person. The Secretary would beg leave to state. The devil he would. Now, suppose you take a back seat and wait until somebody asks you to state something. Mr. Chapin, you will please stop catching flies while the chair is considering the subject of religious toleration. Mr. Ball. Mr. President, the Finance Committee, of which I have the honor to be chairman, have arrived at the conclusion that it is 130 miles from here to Folsom, that it will take 230 miles of railroad iron to build a road that distance, without counting the switches. This would figure up as follows: bars 14 feet 3 inches long, weight 800 pounds, 1,000 bars to the mile, 800,000 pounds, 130,000 bars for the whole distance, weight 104 million pounds. Original cost of the iron, with insurance and transportation to Folsom from St. Louis via Salt Lake City, added, say $3.50 a pound, would mount to a fraction over or under $312,722,239.42. $312,722,239.42, sir. That is the estimate of the committee, sir, for prime cost of one class of material without counting labor and other expenses. In view of these facts, sir, it is the opinion of the committee that we had better not build the road. I did not think it necessary to submit a written report, because— The President. Take your seat, Mr. Ball. Take your seat, sir. Your evil eye never lights upon this chair, but the spirit moves you to confuse its intellect with some of your villainous algebraical monstrosities. I will not entertain them, sir. I don't know anything about them. You needn't mind bringing in any written reports here, or verbal ones either, unless you can confine yourself to a reasonable number of figures at a time, so that I can understand what you are driving at. No, sir, the third house will not build the railroad. The other convention's donation of $3 million in bonds, worth 40 cents on the dollar, will buy enough of one of those bars to make a breastpin, and that will have to satisfy this Commonwealth for the present. I observe that Messrs. Wasson and Gibson and Noteware and Kennedy have their feet on their desks. The chief page will proceed to remove those relics of ancient conventional barbarism from sight. Mr. Musser. Mr. President, to be or not to be, that is the question. The President. No, sir. The question is, shall we tolerate religious indifference in this community, or the rights of conscience, or the right of suffrage, or the freedom of the press, or free speech, or free schools, or free niggers? The Chair trusts it knows what it is about, without any instructions from the members.
Mr. Musser. But, sir, it was only a quotation from the President. Well, I don't care. I want you to sit down. The Chair don't consider that you know much about religion anyhow, and consequently the subject will suffer no detriment from your letting it alone. You and Judge Hardy can subside, and study over the preamble until you are wanted. Mr. Brosnan. Mr. President, these proceedings have all been irregular, extremely and customarily irregular. I will move, sir, that the question be passed, for the present, and that we take up the next section. Mr. Mitchell. I object to that, Mr. President. I move that we go into committee of the whole on it. Mr. Wasson. I move that it be referred back to the Standing Committee. Mr. North. I move that the rules be suspended and the whole article placed upon its final passage. The President. Gentlemen, those of you who are in favor of adopting the original proposition, together with the various motions now pending before the House, will signify the same by saying aye. No one voting in the negative, the Chair decided the vote to be unanimous in the affirmative. The President. Gentlemen, your proceedings have been exactly similar to those of the convention which preceded you. You have considered a subject which you knew nothing about, spoken on every subject but the one before the House, and voted without knowing what you were voting for, or having any idea what would be the general result of your action. I will adjourn the convention for an hour, on account of my cold, to the end that I may apply the remedy prescribed for it by Dr. Tjader, the same being gin and molasses. The Chief Page is hereby instructed to provide a spoonful of molasses and a gallon of gin for the use of the President. Our Carson Dispatch, second session, by telegraph. Third House met after recess and transacted the following business. Secretary read Section 15, Legislative Department. Section 15. The doors of each House shall be kept open during the session. Kinkead moved to amend by adding the words, "and the windows also, if the weather will permit." Secretary read Section 32, Legislative Department. Section 32. No law shall be passed authorizing married women to carry on business as sole traders, on motion of stems construed to mean that married women shall not preach. Secretary read Section 6, Declaration of Rights. Section 6. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed. Youngs moved to amend by striking out the word bear and inserting the word board. Adopted unanimously. Section 1. Miscellaneous Provisions was amended so as to read as follows. Section 1. The seat of government shall be at Carson, and the legislature shall hold its session in the plaza during the first 6 years. Section added, empowering the President of the Third House of the Convention to convene by proclamation the Third House of the State Legislature for the purpose of electing 2 United States Senators within 30 days after the Constitution shall have been ratified. Name of the State changed to Washoe, in conformity with the law which called the Convention together. New section added as follows. Section blank. No sheriff or other officer shall be expected to arrest any assassin or other criminal on strong presumptive evidence merely, nor any other evidence, unless such assassin or other criminal shall insist upon his privilege of being arrested. The hour having arrived for the President to take his regular gin and molasses, the Convention adjourned. Last night, about 12 o'clock, here the telegraph ceased working. Bloomer, operator. Territorial Enterprise, December 25th through 27th, 1863. Local column. A Christmas gift. Mr. Twain, compliments of Miss Chase, Christmas, 1863. This handwriting disposed us to suspect treachery, and to regard the box as a deadly infernal machine. It was on this account that we got a stranger to open it. This precaution was unnecessary. The diabolical box had nothing in it but a ghastly naked porcelain doll baby. However, we are much obliged. We always had a hankering to have a baby, and now we are satisfied. The mythical Miss Chase helped us to the business, and she has our cordial thanks for her share in it. Territorial Enterprise, late December, 1863. Mark Twain's review of Artemus Ward's lecture. There are, perhaps, 50 subjects treated in it, and there is a passable point in every one of them, and a healthy laugh, also, for any of God's creatures who hath committed no crime, the ghastly memory of which debars him from smiling again while he lives. The man who is capable of listening to the "Babes in the Wood" from beginning to end without laughing either inwardly or outwardly must have done murder, or at least meditated it, at some time during his life. Territorial Enterprise, December 29, 1863. Local Column. Christmas Presents. We received from Carson, Saturday, a long yellow box of suspicious appearance, with the following inscription upon it: "Mark Twain, Enterprise Office, Virginia. Free, Politeness Langton's Pioneer Express. Bihimi Suavin." That last phrase is Greek, and means "bully for you." We are not sure that it was written by Mrs. H. F. R., of Carson, and there was no evidence accompanying the box to show that it was. This is what makes us so obstinate in the opinion that it might have been written by somebody else. The box contained a toy rabbit, of the jackass persuasion, gifted with ears of aggravated dimensions, and swathed in sagebrush. An Indian chief, a mere human creation, made of raisins strung on a skeleton formed of a single knitting needle, with a solitary fig for a body, and a chicken feather driven into the head of the effigy to denote its high official character. One more present remained, the same being a toy watchman's rattle, made of pine and tastefully painted. We are glad to have that rattle now, but when we asked for such a thing at a certain convivial party in Carson, it will be remembered that we meant to bestow it upon another young man who was present, and whose absent mind, we imagined, might be collected together and concentrated by means of such an instrument. We have presented the rabbit to Artemus Ward, to be preserved as a specimen of our resources. The other presents we shall always wear near our heart. The following report of the committee, accompanying the box, has been received, accepted, adopted, and the same referred to the Committee of the Whole People. Carson City, December 25, 1863. Mr. Mark Twain. Sir, the undersigned has the honor to be selected by the gay company of ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls, and Santa Claus, who came in person with Judge Dixon's wolfskin cap, coat, pants, and a mask, and sleigh bells around his waist, and dashed in the room just after Mrs. Cutter and 2 long rows of children had sung a pretty piece and read a letter from Santa Claus, when that individual immediately dashed into the room, to the terror of some of the children, 36 in all, and climbed the Christmas tree, all covered with presents, and little lighted candles, and handed down things for everybody, and afterwards danced with the now reconciled children, and then dashed out. After which there was supper and dancing by the ladies and gentlemen, and the school which was thus made to enjoy themselves last night till midnight was Miss H. K. Clapp and Mrs. Cutter's seminary, which is one of the best there is, and instructed me to send you these things, which I do by Langton's Express, handed down from the Christmas tree by Santa Claus, marked Mark Twain, to wit, 1 rabbit under a sagebrush, to represent your design for a seal in the Constitutional Convention; 1 rattle, presented by a lady of whom you begged for one when you were here last; and a Piute to be eaten, being a chief with a chicken feather in his hat, composed of a fig for his body and otherwise raisins, sent to you by request of a lady of the medical profession, all of which is submitted by William A. Trinity, Committee. Territorial Enterprise, December 30, 1863. The Bolters in Convention. At 7 o'clock last night a large number of citizens met at the courthouse for the purpose of selecting 16 new delegates, which they hoped might prove more acceptable to the State Convention than those elected by the regular county convention day before yesterday. There appeared to be some discord in this convention as well as in that which preceded it, But of course the manner in which it was constituted prevented the possibility of anyone's bolting from it in the regular and recognized way. It was a gorgeous sight to behold those 200 fearless spirits of story, those noble human soda bottles, so to speak, effervescing with the holy gas of pure unselfish patriotism, rising in their might to bust out, as it were, the infamous action of 3,000 voters of Storey County, as done in the county convention by their chosen representatives. But we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we glorious Americans will occasionally astonish the God that created us when we get a fair start. The proceedings opened with 3 cheers and a tiger for the Stars and Stripes. Mr. Corson moved that Dr. Minneer be elected chairman of the meetings. Carried. Mr. Barclay nominated William H. Davenport and James Phelan as secretaries. They were elected without opposition. The following vice presidents were then elected: James Brannan, Dighton Corson, Judge Laconey, J. W. Noyes, Thomas Lynch, Judge Ferris, John A. Collins, A. B. Elliott, E. Bond, W. H. Young, J. S. Black, Thomas G. Taylor, S. A. Kellogg, Judge Frizzle, J. H. Heilshorn, P. Quigley, J. T. Sage, John Church, W. R. Warnock, and R. H. Ryder. Several of these gentlemen were said to be present. The chairman reviewed the action of the county convention, and said it was not satisfactory to the majority of the community. Therefore the people had met now to improve upon that action in their sovereign capacity as fountainhead of power in the land. He said the present convention would nominate 16 delegates, and hoped they would be accepted by the State Convention in preference to the delegates elected by the late packed convention. A voice, "3 cheers!" No response. A committee previously and mysteriously appointed immediately brought in a report containing the following names. There was no suspicion of packing about it, however. The report reads as follows: Report of the committee appointed by a meeting of citizens held at the courthouse on Monday evening, December 29th, to select the names of 16 citizens to be presented to the mass meeting this evening as suitable persons to represent Storey County in the Union State Convention to be held at Carson on the 31st inst., beg leave to submit the following names: Dr. Geiger, John Dole, Thomas Lynch, Captain White, Joseph Loria, J. L. Black, George E. Brickett, Thomas Hanna, J. D. Meager, Augustus Ash. Mr. Corson moved that the report be accepted and the committee discharged. Carried. Mr. Fitch was called for and addressed the convention at great length, rehashing, adding to, and improving his most recent editorials in the Virginia Union. He was heard with interest and was frequently applauded. As is always his custom, Mr. Brosnan spoke eloquently and feelingly, and was repeatedly and loudly cheered. Public speakers are not given to adhering strictly to the truth as a general thing, but we know Judge Brosnan is. However, he stood up there last night and misrepresented old Nestor, a poor devil who has been dead hundreds and hundreds of years, and Judge Brosnan knew perfectly well that he was departing from the record when he unblushingly abused old Nestor's wardrobe and said he wore a poisoned shirt. Now why couldn't he confine himself to living convention packers and let dead foreigners alone? That's it. We are down on that kind of thing, you know. Cries, "Hannah! Hannah! Gentlemen, wait a moment. I call for the adoption of the report before we have any speaking." However, Mr. Hanna came forward and said that, "as had been remarked by both gentlemen who have preceded me," and then went on and made both gentlemen's speeches over again, in such a pleasant way, and with such vehemence of manner that the people, that mighty lever being present, and filling very nearly 3/4 of the House, the people applauded each familiar argument as it fell upon their ears, and felt really comfortable over it. He touched us very agreeably by speaking of us as "those intelligent reporters who officiated at the late Constitutional Convention." The word "intelligent" is our own. We had an idea it would make the sentence read better. Toward the last, Mr. Hanna soared into originality, and touched upon a multitude of subjects on his own hook. Notwithstanding its apparent originality, however, we shall always be haunted by the dreadful suspicion that the fag end of Tom Hanna's speech was gobbled out of the Babes in the Wood. Mr. Brosnan moved that a committee of 5 be appointed to draft resolutions. Mr. Pepper suggested that there was already a question before the House. A voice, "Sit down." The chairman remarked that there was a question before the House, and proceeded to state it as being on the adoption of the report of the Committee on Nominations. The House refused to entertain the report in its entirety, and demanded, in great confusion, that the candidates should be voted for separately, which was done, and the following gentlemen elected: Messrs. Geiger, Dole, Lynch, White, Black, Hanna, Warnock, Ashe, Phillips, G.H. J.Y., Paul, Doak (question), Frizzle, Burke, Knox, Brickett. Messrs. Loria and Mager were voted for and rejected, and confusion grew worse confounded in the meantime. Mr. Warnock moved the appointment of a nominating committee of 10 to present names to the next mass meeting as candidates for legislators, judges, etc. Carried. The Committee on Resolutions was appointed as follows: Messrs. Brosnan, Frizzle, Hanna, Corson, Bond. The committee created by Mr. Warnock's resolution was then nominated and elected as follows: Messrs. Warnock, James Campbell, Hanna, Jacob Young, Manning, Lackey, Dimmock, Carey, Van Vliet, and Flood. Mr. Corson moved to add 5 to the committee, and take them from Gold Hill and Flowery. Carried. The following gentlemen were nominated and elected: Messrs. Phillips, LaFleur, and Bishop. Here great trouble arose about a suggestion that the convention might possibly be electing people who were opposed to them. It was a wise and bully idea. Mr. James Campbell called at our office after the convention adjourned, and requested us to remove his name from the nominating committee. After which, with remarkable unanimity, the convention struck off the names of the Gold Hill members from the nominating committee, and left it to the President to fill up with other Gold Hill men. Mr. Frizzle submitted the following names, which he said had been selected by a mass meeting in Gold Hill: William C. Darrell, E. R. Burke, Ed C. Morse, Sam Doak, and J. W. Phillips. They were unanimously elected. Charles H. Knox of Flowery was added to the committee. The Committee on Resolutions then reported as follows: Resolved, that as subjects of a government yet free we rejoice at the inestimable right and privilege to publicly assemble and approve or condemn, when the general good requires it, the manner in which our representatives may have discharged the duties as signed them by the suffrages of the people. 2. As the sense of this large assemblage of citizens, which may justly be denominated a spontaneous uprising of an outraged and insulted constituency, that the action of the County Nominating Convention held in Virginia on the 28th day of December instant has been unjust, unfair, arbitrary, and without precedent in the history of conventional legislation. 3. That the resolutions adopted, and the other proceedings had by the said convention, failed to express the true sentiments of the people of this county, and only proclaim the sentiments of a few interested individuals. Regarding them as such, we unanimously repudiate them, and declare that those resolutions and proceedings ought not to have, and have not, any binding force upon the political action of the free, independent, and Union-loving electors of Storey County. 4. That copies of the proceedings of this meeting be transmitted to the members of the ensuing State Nominating Convention from other counties, accompanied with a respectful request that they will do justice to the great majority of the people of Storey County, and rebuke the odious and unjust system of packing conventions by admitting the nominees of this meeting to seats in the convention, as the true delegates and representatives of the people of Storey. The resolutions were unanimously adopted. A County Central Committee was elected, as follows: J. L. Black, Charles Knox, James Phelan, E. R. Burke, Samuel Doak, T. R. P. Dimmock, Thomas Barclay, Dighton Corson, W. D. Warnock, Jacob Young. Motion that the delegates elected be instructed to go to Carson tomorrow, Wednesday, and that no proxies be allowed except in extreme cases, and that such extreme cases be attended to by the delegates themselves, carried. A motion that the Central Committee meet in the District Court room tomorrow, Wednesday evening, prevailed. Also, a motion that the Convention adjourn until next Monday evening, to meet then at the District Court room. The meeting broke up with cheers for the Convention, the Union, the old flag, and groans for Stewart and Baldwin. It was a very dusty Convention, and, as has been previously remarked in America, we are a great people. Card. Editor's Enterprise. The gentleman who reported the proceedings of the Union mass meeting last evening for the Enterprise unintentionally misquotes. He says Mr. Brosnan slandered the defunct Nestor. Not so. Mr. B. made no allusion to that harebrained crazy old fool Nestor, nor to his wardrobe. But Mr. B. did mention that other jealous and wicked cuss, Nessus, and his historical villainous shirt. Now, if that facetious sinner, blunderer, and sagebrush painter Mark Twain had thus libeled me, I could forgive him. But to be thus misrepresented, though undesignedly, by the intelligent reporter of the Enterprise is, as Mrs. Partington would say, absolutely inseparable. Virginia, December 30th. C. M. Brosnan. Territorial Enterprise, December 30th, 1863. A gorgeous swindle. Dr. May, of the International Hotel, has put into our hands the following documents, which will afford an idea of how infinitely mean some people can become when they get a chance. This firm of Reed & Company, bankers, 42 South 3rd Street, Philadelphia, will do to travel, but not in Washoe. If we understand the peculiar notions of this people, the accompanying letter, circular, and certificate of stock were sent by Reed & Company to Dr. May's nephew, Theodore E. Clapp, Esquire, postmaster at White Pigeon, Michigan. Through the doctor, Mr. Clapp had learned a good deal about Washoe, and saw at a glance, of course, that a swindle was on foot, which would not only cheat multitudes of the poorest classes of men in the States, but would go far toward destroying confidence in our mines and our citizens if permitted to succeed. He lost no time, therefore, in forwarding the villainous papers to Dr. May, and we are sure the people of the Territory are right heartily thankful to him for doing so. The certificate of stock is a curiosity in the way of unblushing rascality. It does not state how many shares there are in the company, or what a share is represented by. It is a comprehensive arrangement. The company proposed to mine all over Nevada Territory adjoining California. They are not partial to any particular mining district. They are going to carry on a general gold and silver mining business. The untechnical leather-headed thieves, the company is to be organized at some indefinite period in the future, probably in time for the resurrection. The company is to be incorporated for the purpose of purchasing machinery. They only organize a company in order to purchase machinery. The inference is that they calculate to steal the mine. And only to think a man has only got to peddle 40 or 50 of these certificates of stock for Messrs. Reed & Company in order to become fearfully and wonderfully wealthy. Or, as they eloquently put it, by taking hold now and assisting to raise the capital stock of this company, you have it within your grasp to place yourself in a way to receive a large income annually without spending 1 cent. Oh, who wouldn't take hold now? Breeze there a man with soul so led that he wouldn't take hold under such seductive circumstances? Scarcely. Reed & Company want to get money. Rather than miss, they will even grab at a paltry 2½ piece, thus: you can send in $2.50 at a time, 2½ at a time, to buy shares in another Gould & Curry. But the coolest, the soothingest, the most refreshingest paragraph, to speak strongly, is that one which is stuck in at the bottom of the circular, with an air about it which mutely says, it's of no consequence and scarcely worth mentioning, but then it will do to fill out the page with. The paragraph reads as follows: N.B. Subscribers can receive their dividends as they fall due at Messrs. Reed & Company's Banking House, No. 42 South Third Street, Philadelphia, or have them forwarded by express, of which all will be regularly notified. We imagine we can see a denizen of some obscure Western town walking with stately mien to the express office to get his regular monthly dividend. We imagine less fortunate people making way for him and whispering together, "There goes old Thompson, owns 10 shares in the People's Gold and Silver Mining Company. Lord, but he's rich. He's going after his dividends now." And we imagine we see old Thompson and his regular dividends fail to connect. And finally, we imagine we see the envied Thompson jeered at by his same old neighbors as "the old fool who got taken in by the most palpable humbug of the century." Who is William Heffley, Esquire, of San Francisco, who knows it all, and who has calmly waited for 3 years without once swerving from his purpose of starting a mining company as soon as he could become satisfied that quartz mining was a permanent thing? Cautious scoundrel! You couldn't fool him into going into a highway robbery like the People's Gold and Silver Mining Company until he was certain he could make the thing look plausible. But if he wrote those circulars and things, he was never a week in Washoe in his life, because we don't talk about Cap Rock in this country. That's a Pike's Peak phrase. And when we talk about Cab Rock, we never say it pays $24 to the ton, or any other price. We don't crush wall rock as a general thing. There is no Washoe mining district in this territory, and the president of the People's Company did a bully good thing when he reserved the right to change the location of operations whenever he pleased. Mr. Heffley's knowledge of the prices of leading stocks here borders on the marvelous. He says Gould & Curry is worth $5,000 per share. A share is 3 inches, but Gould & Curry don't sell at $20,000 a foot. He puts Ophir at $2,400 per share. Now a share of Ophir is 1 inch. All the other prices mentioned by Mr. Heffley are wrong, and never were right at any time, perhaps. In the items written by Mr. Heffley and pretended to be clipped from the Bulletin and the Standard, he uses mining technicalities never uttered either by miners or newspaper men in this part of America. The only true statement in these documents is the one which reads, "Therefore, in subscribing to the capital stock of this company, you are acting on a certainty and taking no risk whatever." That is eminently so. You are acting on a certainty of being swindled, and so far from there being any risk about that result, it is the deadest open and shut thing in the world. Now, this swindle ought to be well ventilated by the newspapers. Not that sound business men will ever be swindled by it, but the unsuspected multitude who yearn to grow suddenly rich will assuredly have their slender purses drained by it. End of section 12.